Welcome back, everyone. This is Ayad Budiab, and in this lesson, I'd like to talk a little bit more about controllers. As I said in the previous lesson, I'd like to discuss controllers more and more as we progress through this course. So this time I'm going to talk about a similar example, but different ways of doing things, such as right now I have everything in one file. Okay, in the previous exercise, I had the HTML in the HTML file and then the JS in the JS file. In this case, I'm going to use a script and show you that you can also put everything in one file. Although as your program or as your application gets bigger and bigger, you would notice the preference of having separate files, right? Just all the JS in one file. And also you can organize them where the controllers would go, where the services would go, and so on. But for now, I'm going to put everything in one file to show you that it can be done, and then we can experiment with different controllers. And also, I'd like to talk about expressions and how we can evaluate expressions in the binding portion of Angular. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this. We have a reference to the script angular.js. You see that here. Under the reference, I'm going to create a script, and this is where everything else would go. Okay. Now I need to, as I said earlier, I need to start with a module. Of the module, I'll create a controller. The controller will take a scope. It will add items onto the scope. I will reference my controller on my page, and then that scope would be available to that element within the page. That's what we've done before, and let's do something like that right now. So I'm going to start with a variable. Let's call it main app, and that will be Angular dot module, and then in here I'm going to indicate the name of the module, which is main app. This module does not depend on other modules, so I'm going to create an empty array. If you recall in the previous exercise, we started by saying angular.module, and then we said dot, and then we put the controller, we chained them together. In this case, I'm going to show you that you can simply say angular.module, and then put that in a variable, and then refer to the variable down there as you progress. Now, one thing that we can start with, and before we forget, up here in the HTML, I'm going to use ng-app. And remember, you can always also say data-ng-app. Either way it would work. So ng-app will be equal to the actual main app that I just declared below. So now main app here, main app there. See that? Okay. So now I have the variable main app declared. I can say main app dot controller. I'm creating controller off of that. I'm going to give that controller a name. Let's call it publisher controller. And that will be a function. Remember that the function takes the scope service as a parameter, so it can put things onto the scope, and then these items will be available as we refer to that controller in the view. So now I have the controller, and this is the body of the controller. Okay, I'm going to put few things in here. I'm not going to refer to all of them, just as an example that you can add things onto the scope, and that I'm not going to refer to all of them on the page. So for example, I can say $scope dot publisher. Let's refer to a publisher. Let's say, for example, the publisher is Apress. Okay, and then let's give a description. $scope dot description equals, and then in here we can put a description such as this publisher has many IT courses, IT books. Okay, let's do that. And then underneath here, let's add something else in the scope. So $scope dot, let's say add tax, something like that, just to show you that you can also add function, not just members, right? That takes a value, and that function would actually returns value plus value times 0.02. Okay, so you can put a function in there. And also let's put some other stuff. Let's put some books in here and refer to that as an array. So now I can say $scope, and you can do dot books, and for those books I'm going to make it an array. And let me go ahead and paste some of those objects within the array. So I can say something like that. Okay. Now in this case, in the books, I have the objects, right? The object contains the title, the author, the release date, and the cost. Title, author, release date, and the cost, so on, until we get all the elements within that array. Okay, I think in here you can say text or format selection, text, format selection, or something like that if you want to make it look nice. But anyway, you added your object, you added your controller. In the controller you put the publisher, the description, you put some functions, and you can add an array. Now you have, this is basically the function that represent the publisher controller. You passed in the scope as a parameter to this function. For this is called injection, dependency injection. So right now we inject the scope here so we can tag things into it. We add these parameters, the publisher, the description, the add tags, and the books. I add this to the scope. So now when I refer to my controller in my HTML, these scope members would be available to me so I can bind to them and display them on my page. Okay, so then all this is in a script, and that script is declared right under the reference to Angular. Okay, so now go back to the body of the actually to the rest of the body of the page, and in here we refer to ng app, main app, and it's right here. That's the main app. We refer to it up there, and now we need to use the actual controller. Okay, so I'm going to declare a div here, and for this div I'm going to refer to my controller. So like I did in the previous video, ng controller, and then equals, and that will be the publisher controller that you got from here. I'm going to refer to the publisher controller. Now inside that I'm going to create a paragraph, and for this paragraph I'm going to let's say I'm going to make it bold in here, and for this one I'm going to refer to the publisher. So the controller is in this div, so that means the scope is available. Part of the scope elements is the publisher, so I'm going to refer to publisher here. Okay, and then after putting that I'm going to put something like colon, and in this case I'm going to refer to the description of the publisher. So description, since description is in the scope, I can refer to that description up here. Okay, now this would actually should display for me the publisher and the description. Let's go ahead and save, and let's say for example I can get the path and then throw that up here and go to the page. It says publisher and it says description. When you look at something like this and you see that it didn't bind, means something is wrong on the page. Okay, we missed something, and that's why it's not binding correctly like it's supposed to. So let's go back to the page and figure out what's going on. Going back into the page, I can see in here that I have my ng controller. That's the publisher controller. This is the one being used here, main app.controller. That will be the publisher controller. I have the actual main app, right? That's the module. I'm using the right module up there. I have my scopes, publisher equal this, description equal that, the scope add tags, and the scope books with all the information. I have my main app being declared, and then main app.controller. It creates the controller, and here it is. I have a comma, then the function, right? So I have the actual name of the controller. I missed the comma, and then you get the function with the scope. That should be it. And then if I save, and now just copy that path, go back to the page, and then look at it. I have a press. This publisher has many IT books. As you can see, it bound to the actual publisher and to the description. So then when we use this double brackets, that means it's binding to something, right? And we've seen this across multiple examples. But let's look at a couple of things in here to see what else we can do within these double brackets. So I'm going to create a paragraph here, and I'm going to close it. And let's create, let's say, 4 more of those guys. Okay. Now in here, I'm going to use the double brackets as I said. Okay. Now what can I put in here, right? I can put expressions. It doesn't have to be the actual item from the scope. I don't have to refer to a variable coming from the scope like I did with publisher and description, right? In here, I can say things like 2 times 5 plus 4. Okay, I can do this. I can put expressions within these double brackets. So if I look back at the page and I see it's 14. 2 times 5 is 10. Multiplication takes precedence, and then plus 4 give me 14. So what else can I do? Well, I can say things like, let's put the double brackets. I can say things like the string hello, and then plus another string there, hello there. So you know that we use the plus operator to concatenate 2 strings in JavaScript. So that should give me hello there. Okay, so that's some things I can do. I can do other stuff. Let's say I have an array, right? Let's say the array contains 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's say I have strings in here. Let's call them 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this is an array of these elements, right? And then I can say, for example, for this array, I can index it by saying sub 0. Okay, well, that should give me the 0th element in the array, which should be 1. Let's go ahead and save and reload the page, and says 1. Okay, so what I can do, what I see in here, that I can do some arithmetic operations. I can concatenate strings within my double brackets, and I can also have an array and index elements within the array. Okay, let's try something else. Let's put the double brackets, and let's say I can type in here alert, and then let's put semicolon, inside the alert, let's do this is a test. Okay, and let's go ahead and reload that. And as you can see, nothing happens. There's no alert. So then not everything that you can do in JavaScript is supported within these binding expressions in here. Okay, so you have to be careful on what you're using. There are some JavaScript functionality that's being supported, but not everything. Like, for example, we can tell that the alert doesn't work. So bear that in mind when you're using those expressions. And almost always we just refer to the actual elements from the scope so we can bind to them and display them on the screen. So in this case, what we did is we saw how we can work with the binding expressions within the double brackets. And also we saw how we can create another controller. This controller has been created on the same page as the actual HTML. We put that in a script, and we started by creating the module. We refer to that module in ng-app. Be careful, remember to do that anytime you're working with those examples, otherwise it will not work. And then also we saw how we can pass the scope as a parameter of the function. We inject the scope and we tagged some elements into it, and we refer to this during our binding. Okay, so this is how we can work with controllers again, and let's go on and move to other subjects in Angular. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Ayad Boudiab, and you have a good day.